Welcome back to another episode of Ladies Leading Live. We are again covering the 7 female leadership competencies that we've discovered from our research through Ladies Leading. And this week we're talking about self-awareness. And we normally go live at noon on Wednesdays, but there's some big things happening today, hence the pearls that we will be a little bit more focused on. So we decided to go live a little bit early, and you all can watch the replay later on. So when we talk about self-awareness, the conversations we had with so many of the female leaders, they talked about this act of being really self-aware. And it took a lot of different forms, knowing yourself, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, but also really knowing who you need to surround yourself with as a leader, whether it's other staff members, other colleagues, friends, people to give you advice, mentors, advocates, and that is an important component of self-awareness. We're not going to really dig into that piece of it, who you surround yourself with, but what we found from the women that we talked to was that was a piece of their self-awareness, was really understanding what they were really good at and what things they needed to compensate with other people in their lives, not necessarily new skills. And that's such an important component of leadership that I think weaves into self-awareness. When we really are focusing on self-awareness, I think, one of the things that we talked to women about was I heard a lot of women say, you have to know yourself, you have to be confident, you have to have good self-awareness. And when we asked the female leaders that we talked to, well, how did you build that self-awareness? What are the things that you did and how did you work on self-awareness? There were lots of different answers. And so let me dial us back a little bit and say, when we think about self-awareness, I think this is a really challenging skill and exercise for women in so many places in their lives from a very young age. We were taught as young girls that confidence is really rooted in loving yourself, that you have to like yourself and feel proud of who you are, and that's where confidence comes from. But the reality is, and what I know is that confidence doesn't really come from loving yourself. It comes from knowing yourself. It comes from greater self-awareness. And so when we talk to all these female leaders, they talked a lot about feeling confident and having confidence. And what we really learned from them is that confidence came from the self-awareness work that they were doing on a regular basis. The self-awareness work that they were focused on as a regular practice in their lives, and not just who they should surround themselves with, but lots of different things about who they are. And I think that's the important piece around self-awareness, is that self-awareness is this daily practice. It's this daily practice and constant self-discovery that we have to do as women. Now, when we talk about confidence, I think the other piece of it is that, social media has sort of made confidence a little bit difficult for us as women, a little bit difficult for young women, maybe college aged, high school aged women, because we have so much social media in our lives, so many Instagram influencers, so many people that are sort of in our face constantly with these perfect external versions of themselves. And the reality is external confidence, the stuff we do on the outside, a great outfit, a new hairdo, a new lipstick, those sort of things provide us external confidence. But external confidence only gets us so far. What we really have to do is we have to work on the internal confidence, which is that self-awareness work again. And so, I want to talk about this self-awareness work. So a lot of women we talk to, when I ask them, okay, so how do you build self-awareness? Some of them cited some leadership or personality type assessments that they could take, StrengthsFinder, Enneagram, the Berkman, like all these types of assessments that you can take now that tell you a little bit about who you are. And I think those are valuable. Those sort of give you a perspective of externally how others might view you, or externally what your responses might say about who you are. But I think that those things we think are going to be the silver bullet. We think that they're going to tell us all the things that we need to know about ourselves, and then we can skip the really hard work of true self-awareness. And the reality is that those things are helpful and beneficial. And I think there's significant value to some of those personality tests and some of those leadership inventories. But at the same time, there's still a lot more work that we have to do. Stephanie Ewing, who was one of the ladies that we interviewed, talked a lot about journaling. And I follow her on social media, and every day she's posting about this workout that she's doing or this journaling that she's doing. And she talked a lot about how journaling was a really important exercise for her as a female leader for self-awareness. And what that really is it's an act of introspection. Introspection is what we know builds greater self-awareness. And introspection is simply, thinking about yourself, evaluating yourself, considering questions about yourself. And so, we have to be better about this act of introspection. For some of us, it's journaling. For some of us, it's meditation. For some of us, we don't like to write. We'd rather just think about it. Maybe it's audio notes. We leave ourselves on our phones. There's lots of different ways to do the act of introspection that are not necessarily journaling. I've tried to journal 100 different times. I've bought all sorts of guided journals, ones where you just answer 3 questions a day, one where you just write whatever comes to your mind, one where you have specific questions you answer, one where there's like a theme. I've tried it all and I suck at it. I can do it for like 3 days and then I take a break, and then like a week later I come back to it and then I take another break, and then a year later I have like a journal that I paid $14 for that has like mostly empty pages. And so for me, that act of introspection isn't best done in the form of writing. And so you really have to find what act of introspection works for you. So what's interesting is as we started to look into this idea of self-awareness and how women can build greater awareness to who they really are, their strengths, their weaknesses, their values, all of those things, we started to look at the existing body of research around self-awareness. And there's this great book by Tasha Eurich called Insight. And she studied self-awareness. And in one of her studies, she asked people, are you self-aware? And when you ask people, are you self-aware? Most of us believe that we are. And in fact, 85% of the people that they asked said, yeah, I'm pretty self-aware. And what they discovered through their research is that really only about 10 to 15% of people really were self-aware. And that happens for a number of reasons. But the primary reason that that happens is that we actually cannot easily or even directly access our unconscious thoughts and feelings. And so what our brain does in a lot of situations where we evaluate, what our brain does is it actually makes up answers that feel true. And so if you're asking yourself like, oh, why am I so aggravated about that interaction with that leader? Your brain can't actually access why you're actually unconsciously aggravated by that interaction. So it will make up things that feel true. So alternative facts. Our brain makes up alternative facts. Congratulations. And so, this act of introspection, we have to get better at and really use it to bring greater awareness to the forefront. Maybe not accessing our unconscious thoughts and feelings, but really doing the work to understand what we can do differently. The whole point of Tasha Eurich's book is to understand that in self-awareness and in introspection, we're actually doing it wrong. So it may be you had a negative interaction with a colleague and you ask, why am I so aggravated by him all the time? Or maybe you choked in a meeting when somebody asked you a question and you ask yourself, why did I choke in that meeting? And the reality is that those why questions don't actually lead us to better self-awareness. Why did I choke in that meeting? Why am I so aggravated? Actually, those why questions often put the ownership and they put the blame on the other person. Where we might answer, why am I so aggravated by that interaction with so-and-so? we actually start to blame the other person and something that they did instead of really reflecting on what we could have done differently or how we could have managed the situation better. And when we ask, why did I choke in that meeting? We look for external reasons why we didn't answer the question appropriately, or we look for blame for other people instead of asking, what could I have done to better prepare? So instead of asking, why am I so aggravated by that interaction? We need to ask ourselves, what can I do differently to have better outcomes in my interactions with that individual? What are some things I can do to better get my point across when I'm communicating with them? Or when we're asking, why did I choke in that meeting? You might ask instead, what could I have done to better prepare for that meeting? What was it about that situation that made me feel nervous? And how can I have better control over my anxiety in those situations? Those questions, the what questions, lead us to better understanding of ourselves. And not just better understanding of ourselves, but how we can modify our behaviors, our interactions, our decision-making processes to have better outcomes in the future. And that's the real self-awareness work. And so if I'm nervous every time I walk into a meeting and I choke every time I get answered a question, that's going to hurt my confidence. And so I'm going to lack confidence walking into those environments. But if I do that work to understand what can I do to better prepare, how can I respond better when I'm feeling nervous? How can I level set, what can I do differently to level set my anxiety before going into those meetings, and I start to have better outcomes, that builds self-awareness, but it also improves my confidence as a female leader. So that maybe I don't walk into meetings anymore and feel nervous and anxious and not have confidence to speak up, where now I feel empowered and enabled to be able to do that. And so when we think about self-awareness as women, we've really got to start to look at, how do we ask more what questions? And when you find yourself asking why questions, we've got to switch those questions and say, how can I take ownership over this situation? And what can I learn from it? See, there, once you do it, you can't stop doing it. So um, and I think when we look at those what questions and we start building a practice of daily looking at those interactions, looking at those experiences, and not asking ourselves why, but asking ourselves what, that allows us to better understand ourselves and how we can have better outcomes at work, at home, in interactions, in relationships, with our partners, with our children, with anybody in our lives that we might interact with. I think the other thing is to think about, okay, if I start to look at my behaviors, those things, it's self-awareness around my behaviors and how I can be more confident in those situations is important. But I also need to bring better self-awareness around what my skills are and what my skill gaps are. And so thinking about, what are the things that I'm really good at? What are the things that I enjoy? What are the things that I want to be better at? What are the things that I'm doing right now that I suck at that I don't want to be better at? And doing some reflection around skills and skill gaps. But more importantly, doing some reflection around values and motives. What are the things I care about? What are the things that motivate me? Why am I doing these things? What is the motive behind them? And really understanding those things as well. When we get into interactions, when we are deciding whether to say yes or no to an opportunity, when we're looking at a business partnership or even relationships, to look at values and motives. When we have greater awareness around our values and our motives, it allows us to make decisions quicker. It allows us to not just make decisions quicker, but allows us to feel better about those decisions as well. So think about self-awareness in a bunch of different buckets. There's some preemptive and continual work that we can do around self-awareness that's based on values and motives, that's based on skills and skill gaps. And then there's some situational self-awareness that we can bring to ourselves in the moment and as things happen in our lives. One of them you can do proactively, and one of them you do reactively. But those are things that we can do on a regular basis. Respond to maybe the proactive stuff on a day-to-day basis to bring greater awareness and self-discovery. And then respond reactively when we have situations that hurt our confidence or make us feel uncomfortable or make us upset or angry or sad, or when we have any sort of extreme emotions about them, even extreme joy and happiness. What are those reasons that we are having extreme joy and happiness, and how can we replicate those in our lives as well? So I think, there's lots of guided journals you can pick up around it. Journaling's not my thing. You might even do some reflection. I found a great peace in 5 minutes of meditation and then thinking about specific questions, reflecting on specific questions in my head. I've actually started leaving myself audio notes. That's much better for me because I'm more verbal than I am in written form. And so the verbal expression is easier for me to reflect on. And so those are all outlets for us to do that work. The important thing that we found in the self-awareness work that we were hearing about from the female leaders we talked to is that it was something that they do every day. It was something that they did pretty consistently, proactively and retroactively. And so they were constantly thinking about both of those things and reflecting on them in a day-to-day way. So that is competency number 2. Next week, we are actually going to talk about the competency of courage. And I'm really excited to talk about courage with you all. Courage is really about taking risks and our propensity to take risks and how we can get better at risk-taking behaviors that are healthy. And we'll dig into that a little bit more. So thank you all for joining me today. Also wanted to remind you that we have opened registration for our Ladies Leading Masterclass, where we will dig in depth to each of these competencies month by month over the course of 8 months. You can go to ladies-leading.com/masterclass to learn more. The class starts in March, and so we hope to see some of you there. Thanks all. Have a great day.